women. So it really bothers me that I see media interviews of other successful athletes, and the interview is just about like celebrating their performance. My interviews are about defending my right to exist. And after my first world championship, I learned a lot from this, but I did a week straight of nonstop media. I actually burnt myself out really bad, and I learned a lot from that. I didn't get to celebrate for a week because like at the event, the way that it often works is at this level of competition, like I've been drug tested multiple times at competitions. It's just part of it. And so they select certain events and then they take the podium and you all get drug tested. So in the time trial where I got silver, by the way, oh yeah. So in the second world championships, I got silver and gold, and the other person got gold and silver. So we walked away with the same medals, and yet somehow it's unfair for me, but not for her. So we got tested in the time trial, but not the sprint. But for the first world championship, we are the last event. The women's 35 to 39 sprint is the very last event of the entire 10-day whatever championships. And then you are greeted as soon as you get off the track by your anti-doping chaperone, who will not leave your side until you go into the bathroom. And they have to be behind you at all times. So you can never be behind them. And so like you win your first world championship, this thing that you've been training for like the past 6 years of being a professional athlete, and you hug a few people and then you're like, oh, what the fuck is this? And then you've got to go to the podium, and one of them is a bitch who then Jennifer Wagner goes on media saying it's unfair, even though I never raced her. And of the 13 times we've ever raced, she's beaten me more times I've beaten her. Like I've got that to deal with. And then now you got to go pee. And once you've like finished competing, and we're in tight skin suits that if you got to go pee, you got to take that whole thing off. So you actually like limit the water you take so you don't have to go to the bathroom. And then now you've got to suddenly go pee on command while someone's watching you, by the way. And I mean, watching you. And for like men, I assume it's a little bit easier to watch from a farther distance, but for women, they actually like get up under there. It's pretty freaking intimate. Like it took me 2 hours of just downing Gatorade to be able to pee. And it was like a whole joke and everything. And then like by then all my friends were gone and I didn't get to celebrate. And yet all of the media exposure I got was defend yourself. Like why? Like, yeah, it's bullshit. I hate it.
So, I want to wrap up my questions by getting back to your favorite science. What's the science that's left, do you think, or that you want to continue? Tell us a little bit about what the research, your next research, that you want to engage in.
I have long said that trying to prove, well, it's a logical fact that trying to prove a negative is impossible. So trying to prove that there is no advantage is impossible because the opposition can always say, well, we need more study. So trying to prove that there is no competitive advantage for trans women is scientifically and politically the wrong move, which is why my focus has been on foregrounding the human rights argument, which is the only argument that matters, to be honest. It is a human right. And a lot of people come back to me and say, who says it's a human right? I'm like, the IOC does. And like, who cares what the IOC does? I'm like, every sport does. And you do too, apparently. So what I am bothered is going to happen is people are going to be spending more and more resources studying trans athletes' performances because we don't have a lot of data on that, to be perfectly honest. There's not many of us. I mean, it's hard to find a sample. And so the one study that they love pointing to is a Swedish study by Week et al. And they studied a dozen non-athletes using a poor proxy for leg strength. And like in the study, they said, these are non-athletes and we only use the proxy for leg strength. Do not apply this to debates about elite athletes. And yet everybody just glomped onto that. And that's what they've done. And I've been out here screaming, it was fucking non-athletes. Like, of course, you take an untrained trans woman and you drop her testosterone, and she's probably not going to get weaker because she's untrained. You take a trained trans woman, and I can tell you from personal experience and tons of testimonies that of all my elite trans women athlete friends, as soon as you drop that testosterone, you're like, where did my fitness go? And it is like almost overnight. It happens in the first week of testosterone suppression. And you're just like, why am I gassed right now? Like, this used to be easy. This used to be my warm up. So we need to just get past this science bullshit. And if I can be permitted to share my screen one more time, there is a news story that came out that I wanted to share. Yeah, okay. So if people recall, I said that I was invited to the IOC in Switzerland to have day-long consultations on their trans policies. And I basically presented them with all the data I've shown you here. The other thing I did, and I think the most effective thing I did to them, is I sat down and I read them their own damn principles back to them. I read them all 7 fundamental principles back to them, like in a room. I'm like, we're doing this. And there were a lot of ohs, because the Olympic spirit is not of the highest, most elite performance. The Olympics is never the most elite performance in that year because of the birth system, because they limit how many athletes from a given country are allowed to attend. So the trans BMX rider, Chelsea, is like top 5 in the world, but the US is only allowed to send 2, right? So there are lots of sports, for example, that like China dominates, but you're allowed to send 2. And so you have many of the world top 10 not competing at the Olympics. And then the Olympics were like, oh, right, yeah, this is more about like mutual understanding and all that sort of, oh, oops. So one of the people in the room, I'm going to share my screen now. Was this guy, Dr. Richard Budget, the IOC's medical and sciences director. And he gave this interview, and a few things stood out to both me and my friends who know my work. So he said that its current guidelines for transgender athletes are not fit for purpose, and says it's plans to release a new one within the next 2 months, by which they mean to make it easier for trans athletes. They are now convinced that, so pre-Tokyo, they were planning to move to a 5 nanomole policy. And I am very widely credited with stopping that from happening from the visit I had with them when I showed them the testosterone data. He said, it's a notable shift. The IOC's medical and sciences director said the science had moved on and stressed that a new framework for sport would also focus on safety as well as fairness. However, he made clear that inclusion remained important and it would be up to each sport to find a sweet spot. He said, I absolutely accept that things move on. At the time, the 10 nanomoles per liter was set because we thought that was the lower level for men. We now know that they go down to 7, which is false. They go down to almost 0, and women can be higher as well. Agreeing on another number is almost impossible and possibly irrelevant. You can debate that endlessly. Well, this is kind of sounding like my talk, isn't it? Instead, Budget said that the IOC would put a framework for individual sports. He says, there's some research, but it depends on whether you're coming from the view of inclusion as the first priority or absolute fairness to the nth degree being the priority. If you don't want to take any risks at all that anyone might have an advantage, then you just stop everybody. That's that coin flip argument, remember? If you're prepared to extrapolate from the evidence there is and consider the fact that there have been no openly transgender women at the top level until now, I think the threat to women's sport has probably been overstated. This is basically word for word what I said to him in Switzerland in 2019. And so I find that just fascinating that this story just came out and they were my words. So maybe I got through.
Oh my gosh, my gosh, my gosh. This has been such a heavy duty, eye-opening, profoundly disturbing, but also enlightening and encouraging conversation. Dr. Ivy, we appreciate your stamina and your absolute boldness in calling out transphobia for what it is and defining it, and also not making it just about your lived experience, but the ways in which we have constructed sport and those who are able to or should be able to participate. Dr. Scott, thank you for bringing that very, very insightful parallel that was very much part of some other stuff that I see relative to protecting the children, which is really not about protecting the children. It really is about the adults and where the adults are or are not in these conversations that threaten and that stir up all this fear of. And in terms of embodying what we set out to do, you have dispelled the myths to the nth degree. And I so hope that we can go back to some of what you said and pass on some of those references. Some people in the chat were asking if you could show them some of the surveys. I think those who were in the chat providing some of those studies, but this has been exactly what we want people to do when they come to our event, is to be challenged, to be encouraged, but to also recognize that there are people doing the work just to fight for their existence. And that is both encouraging, but also very disturbing. So I want to thank you both for carrying on the conversation. Thank you, Dr. Ivy. This was eye-opening, as I said. We want to encourage those who are still with us to please fill out the feedback survey. We want to hear the good, bad, and the unpretty. We also challenge you to take the pledge. I mentioned this at the very beginning, but everything you were talking about, Dr. Ivy, is fundamentally about denying humanity. And so only if you're committed to these principles do we want you to sort of take this, because it's about self-reflection. What are we bringing to the table? Respecting what we don't necessarily understand, having some integrity in the policies that we are making that end up excluding rather than including, and having some empathy and compassion. These are not gendered, these are not faith-based, but rather a faith in our individual and shared humanity. So I can't thank you both enough for challenging and enlightening and also entertaining us. And congratulations again on where you stand. As you pointed out earlier, what you have now cannot be taken away. We only wish you the best in terms of continuing this struggle. And I know that we've got some allies. I saw that in the chat where people who came open-minded enough to hear and connected. So thank you both. Thank you all for coming. I remind you again that we are at our 10th year anniversary, and we certainly want you to follow us as we continue through mid-November. Our next conversation really is about dispelling the myth, critical race theory. So what a wonderful segue, because this really does embody. You have another comment or observation?
I just want to leave you with one thing.
Please.
Fairness and inclusion are not in opposition to each other.
And on that, we thank you all for joining us. We wish you a safe rest of the week. And please continue to like us on Facebook, follow us on social media. And if you enjoyed the program and learned something from the program, we want you to tell people about it. If you got absolutely nothing from this and have nothing except bad things to say about it, then we really ask you to just be quiet and go on about your business. So thank you again. Project Humanities, Arizona State University, 10-year anniversary. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.
Good night. We'll follow up with any details, and we will send out an email to those who registered and get references and all those things. Thank you both. It was challenging on so many levels. Thank you.
Good.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.